Hello and welcome to Daily Bread, Thoughts for Your Devotions. Guys, today is Wednesday, June the 10th, I believe. Yes, Wednesday, June the 10th, as I check my watch. We are still doing well, and little Gus is doing well as well. He is almost 2 weeks old, and now we are kind of transitioning to a different phase in this Daily Bread devotion series. We are starting in on something that I like to call Christ in Film. And these are going to be once a week on Wednesdays. And whenever you're listening to this, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for watching. We're also going to be doing our Friday night live stream, although what that's going to entail will be sort of open-ended. I think it's going to be still a little bit more conversational, whereas I'm going to pick one film per week and kind of go over how the symbolism is the same sort of thing that we see in the Jesus story, in the Christ event that we get in the gospel from the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Today, we are talking about Hook, that 1994, I should look that up, I think it's 1994, classic of cinema, with Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman and Julia Roberts and Maggie Smith, and I think there's a little Phil Collins in there, and Bob Hoskins, and there's one more. Glenn Close plays a man pirate for just a moment. There are a lot of brief cameos that are going on here. I think it's just because a lot of people wanted to be part of a Peter Pan film. I think Nash from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, or Crosby, Stills and Nash, whichever version of that band you're familiar with, is in there and plays a pirate. So a lot of people involved in this, and some who sort of fell out of the limelight, especially some of the child actors, but certainly big names. This was a blockbuster directed by Steven Spielberg, scored by John Williams, and boy, it is an epic. And so I want to just kind of walk you through the points. So for the past couple weeks, we've been talking about certain narrative plots, narrative plot lines and plot points that point us to Jesus, and Hook has quite a few of them. Now, as with any narrative that is not the true narrative, one caveat is not everything is going to line up perfectly. There are going to be things that we go, oh, well, no, that's not Jesus. We're not looking at the Christ. And that's true of pretty much anything, because in most stories, the protagonist is a sinful person, a person with many flaws that ends up becoming this sort of savior figure. Now, Jesus did not have any flaws, did not have any sin. And so while we move forward with this sort of Christ analogy, we recognize that that nobody's ever going to measure up to Jesus himself. So with that aside, let's talk about Hook. I grew up a big fan of Peter Pan, and what we see in Hook is Peter Pan 30 years after his sort of descent from Neverland. We learn early on that Peter Pan, played by Robin Williams, has been adopted by a family, an American family, by the last name of Banning. So Peter Banning becomes this high-powered attorney for a real estate company, and what we are led to believe early on is he is very driven, but only in his job. He has neglected his wife, he has neglected his son, he is neglecting his daughter, all for being successful in the world that he finds himself. He's been invited to speak at a banquet that is going to be hosted in honor of Granny Wendy. She is no longer this little girl that we are familiar with in the Peter Pan story. She is a grandma who has helped orphans all throughout her life, and now she's getting a hospital wing donated in her name. or in her memory, I guess, was she still alive? So Peter Banning flies to visit Granny Wendy with his family. Now, throughout all of this time that we see Peter Banning in the sort of real world, he is exhibiting a lot of characteristics that I like to call the poser. He doesn't know what he's doing. His purpose is not where it should be. His value system is completely skewed from what it should be, what a normal protagonist's value system should be. And so he doesn't really know why he's there. And so we're left to sort of see in Peter something that he doesn't see in himself. And in fact, when he gets to England, to Granny Wendy's apartment, Toodles, who is this old guy now, you'll remember that Toodles was one of Peter Pan's lost boys. He's this old man now, far older than Peter is, which leads us to believe that Toodles crossed over from Neverland into the sort of real world earlier than Peter did. But he doesn't recognize Peter. He's sort of this bumbling idiot. He's lost his marbles. But when Granny Wendy shows up, played by Maggie Smith, the brilliant Maggie Smith, they share a sort of moment where Jack, Peter's son, is sort of describing what Peter does, and he says he blows people out of the water when they bring forth legal battles and stuff like that. And so Maggie Smith, playing Wendy, says, "Peter, you've become a pirate." And so we see that Peter has traded in the value system that he used to stand for a different value system, a value system that he used to hate and abhor. And so right off the bat, we have Peter in the real world, who is not a Christ figure. In fact, I think that you can make the argument that from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, when Peter is in this sort of reality, our universe, Peter is kind of like you and I. Peter plays a part of almost like Peter the apostle, Peter the disciple, where he starts off valuing stuff that is of this world and has a really hard time finally getting to this place where he values the things that are supposed to be valued, which is when he wakes up at the end and he finally realizes, oh yeah, I love my family. This is the reason why I left Neverland to come to the real world, is to become a husband and a father, and this is what's important to me now. But we'll get there in a little while. At the banquet that is hosted for Granny Wendy, where they are presenting the model of her hospital wing or her orphanage wing, Captain Hook breaches the sort of veil of reality, comes from Neverland into the real world, and steals Peter's children, Jack and Maggie. He takes them with him back to Neverland and holds them hostage. And there is this scene where Peter is confronted by Granny Wendy. This is who you are. And so we have this introduction. So if you just kind of discard the very beginning of Peter, and you have this introduction given by Granny Wendy, she opens up her illuminated copy of James Barrie's Peter Pan, which she helped him write, according to the story. She opens this up and she sees a drawing. She shows him a drawing of himself. Peter, don't you know who you are? And so this is the introduction. If you go back to episode 30 of our Daily Bread devotions, this is the introduction to the main character. Peter, don't you know who you are? You are Peter Pan. And this is where Peter starts to have his whole world sort of turned upside down. But he doesn't want to believe it at first. And so the very next scene after Peter, don't you know who you are, he's got a glass of scotch in his hand, and he's been drinking, and he's stumbling over the things that this fort that his kids had built in their room that Granny Wendy had let them stay in before they had been kidnapped. So he stumbles, and he peers out the window that Peter Pan had come to visit Wendy in, and he sees a bright light. It's Tinkerbell coming in, and she tells him, Hook has stolen your kids. You are Peter Pan. She believes in him, and she's going to take him to Neverland. And so she does. And there's this beautiful score that John Williams does when she wraps him up in this bed sheet that's supposed to be a parachute and takes him off. Second star to the right and straight on till morning. So this event kind of is when he is introduced to Tinkerbell again, all the way through to where Tinkerbell negotiates the war that Captain Hook is trying to start by kidnapping Peter Pan's kids. This is the catalyst moment, and it's long. It's a long catalyst moment in the film. I think it takes maybe 15 or 20 minutes for this whole thing to play out. So from that point until Peter wakes up in Neverland, and he finally is identified as the father of these two children. And so we learn that Captain Hook didn't lay eyes on Peter before he kidnapped Peter's children. He just goes into this place and he takes them, and he's waiting for Peter to come. And he's expecting this great Peter Pan, this adventurous guy who knows who he is and is willing to give him a war to end all wars. But Peter has been, according to Smee, gentrified. His mind has forgotten all the adventures of his previous life, and now he's just a regular human being. And so Hook gives Peter a chance to save his children, a chance that Hook knows Peter's going to fail, because he's sort of this pasty, overweight, middle-aged lawyer. And so it takes an act of Tinkerbell to say, I need 4 days to get him in fighting shape so that he can give you this war to end all wars. And Hook says, no, 2 days. And they finally agree on 3 days. These 3 days obviously represent Jesus' 3 days in the tomb, where Jesus defeats sin, death, and the power of the devil. So Peter is given these 3 days. They make him walk the plank, where he is found by the mermaids, and the mermaids rescue him, right? His first sort of followers, but I think that you could really take this as his sort of birth into the world of Neverland, because they sort of rehabilitate him, they give him oxygen, and they put him into a basket which raises him up to the layer of the Lost Boys. And this is where we've covered the introduction, the catalyst, and now we have the followers. These followers, these Lost Boys who initially reject him. He comes to his own, and his own reject him, right? They followed another, Rufio, namely. And so they play all sorts of pranks on him, and they're teasing him, and they're making fun of him because he's this grown-up who has made his way to their lair. And their big thing, the Lost Boys, don't want to grow up, because all grown-ups are pirates. All grown-ups are evil, because in Neverland, no one has a mother. And I think that's just it's a beautiful sort of imagery that everyone needs a mother. Now that's sort of an underlying thing in all of the Peter Pan stories, this idea of orphans and giving value to orphans and giving parenthood to orphans in order to help them not grow up to be pirates. I'll leave that at that right now, because I think that would take us on a whole other tangent that could take us a little while. But for right now, followers. It's not until Tinkerbell comes down and speaks to the Lost Boys and says, look, he's Peter Pan. he's just forgotten who he is. He doesn't know who he is. You need to believe in him, and you need to help him. Otherwise, his kids will be lost to Captain Hook, and Captain Hook will win ultimately. And so it takes this touching moment where this little child comes and like squeezes his face and makes him smile. He goes, "There you are, Peter." And there's this great little exchange between Rufio and Tinkerbell and the boy who believes in Peter. They go back and forth, and so we see here Peter is sort of gathering followers to himself. What happens next is an insight into the enemy's lair. And we have a long scene with Captain Hook and Smee, and we see that Captain Hook is depressed. He doesn't want to live anymore. It seems like there is no worthy opponent for him, and Peter is just sort of this dude who is a has-been, who is no longer going to give him any thrill in life anymore. And so he almost commits suicide, and then Smee convinces him, hey, there's a way around this. In order to get Peter to actually fight, in order for him to be a worthy opponent again, you have to do something to his kids. You don't just have to kidnap them, you have to turn them to support you, to love you, Captain Hook, right? And so what we see is really this Satan figure realizing that it's not enough to just win them over. It's not enough to just possess them. You have to actually win them over. You have to convince them that Satan's way is the right way, the good way. And so he does all these things, right? He tries to isolate Jack, the oldest one, right? And convince him that Peter doesn't love him, doesn't care about him, wishes that he didn't ever have him to begin with, and that everything is more important than he is. And it starts to work. And what we see is later on, when Peter decides he's going to go on sort of an initial campaign, he looks at this baseball game that's going on. Jack introduces Captain Hook to baseball. Captain Hook realizes that Jack loves baseball and that Peter had never been to a baseball game, and so they throw out this baseball game. And Peter realizes, oh my goodness, my son is in love with Captain Hook. Not in a weird sort of way, but as a father figure. And Peter then realizes it's time. It's time for him to take this seriously, and it's time for him to win his child and children back from the evil Captain Hook. Yes, I have changed clothes, but now we're going to talk about the miracles that happen. So when Peter finally takes this seriously, there are some miracles that occur. First of all, he sits down to have dinner with his disciples after he has been training and taking it seriously that he's going to finally engage with Captain Hook and get his family back. He sits down and there is an exchange with Rufio, the guy who has usurped his throne, and they engage in a what's kind of a funny and disgusting insult battle. And at first it looks like Rufio is going to have the upper hand, but then this lawyer gives it back to him, and bangarang Peter, and he finally wins against Rufio, and Rufio shows his disdain and his defeat, and they finally sit down to dine together like they always had before. Peter is becoming the Pan, the Messiah in Neverland again. Order is being restored. And so this feast comes out, and Peter, he gets up on the table and he's having fun again. something that was foreign to him when he was in the real world. And Rufio throws a coconut at him, and he turns around and he slices it in half midair with a sword. And this miracle makes everybody pause and realize, oh, he is for real. Now, what happens next is this conviction. Now, we're kind of going out of order, because after this he goes and he goes into Jack and Captain Hook's baseball game, and we've talked about that a little bit. But after that baseball game, Jack hits this home run, and Peter is disheartened because Captain Hook looks like he has won Jack over to his side, and Jack calls him Dad, and Captain Hook calls Jack, Peter's son. And so Peter runs away, and he finds his shadow. Now, if you are familiar with the Peter Pan story, and you go all the way back to the Peter Pan cartoon from Disney back in the 1950s, Peter is looking for his shadow, and his shadow is kind of his identity. And when his shadow and him are separated, he's not whole. And so he looks in the pond, and he sees his former self, and he looks over and he sees his shadow, and his shadow is pointing him to some other place. And so the place that the shadow is pointing him to is Hangman's Tree, the former base of Peter and his small band of lost boys. And so Peter realizes, after these miracles that he's performed, that he is the Pan. He is the one who can put Neverland back in order again. And so this is sort of his preparation montage that we're getting into now. He has been prepared. He has performed some miracles. His followers are all behind him, except for one, and that's Rufio still. But he has to learn how to fly. He has to learn how to do that one thing that makes him unique in Neverland. He has to remember what his happy thought is. And this is the part where I start to tear up when I watch this movie, because he finds the teddy bear, which was Michael's teddy bear, and they call it Tatty, not Teddy. And then and with a word association, he finally goes from Tatty to Daddy, and he remembers why he left Neverland. He left Neverland to become a father. And so you get this flashback of him with his wife Moira, and with Jack as an infant, and he's crying and he's happy, and he realizes this is his happy thought. And in mid-memory, the camera goes back to Peter, and he's hovering above the ground. He's remembering how to fly again, because he's remembering the reason why he's there. He's remembering the reason why he's alive. This is his preparation montage. And so Tinkerbell says, when he finally remembers, it's kind of like this Peter walking on the water. He remembers, and then he starts to sink, and Tinkerbell goes, hold that thought, hold that happy thought. And he does. And he soars out of that Hangman's Tree, and what we see there is him going into his disciples, the Lost Boys, and he soars about like he used to do when he was Peter Pan. He's Peter Pan again, and Rufio sees this, and what happens after that is this sort of farewell. Because it's sort of this mountaintop experience, this transfiguration experience. He lands, and Rufio hands over his sword, which was Peter's sword to begin with, and he says, "You are the Pan." Now this is a beautiful moment of identification and preparation and miracle and all these sort of things, and the farewell and the betrayal all melded together, because he can fly, he can fight, and he can crow. And he starts to crow, and this beautiful moment prepares all of them, steels his disciples for what's about to come next. The final battle. The preparations are made, and Peter engages in battle. He shows up right when the time is running out, and he cuts a hole in the pirate's mast, in the sail, right from the main mast, a shape of him, and he comes and he fills it in. This gaping hole in the pirate's life, and he comes and he fills it in. He is the one that they have been searching for. He is the one that they have been waiting for and preparing for, and Peter is about to bring the battle to them. And the Lost Boys come and they fight valiantly. And there is even a point where, because the Lost Boys are fighting this battle with, they bring knives to a gunfight, but it really is a lot of fun. And there's a part where Peter says, "Show them the white light that you're made of," and Hook says, "You've all been forged from the fires of hell, and go at thee," right? And it really is this sort of good versus evil that they have in the dialogue. Now, in this final battle, Peter has to choose between his daughter and Rufio. His daughter, his children, and engaging with the enemy, and he chooses his children. And once he has made sure that his child is safe, he goes back and is attempting to engage with Captain Hook, while Rufio is holding him off, and Captain Hook kills Rufio. And there is mourning. But then Peter engages, and there's this sword fight that is supposed to be the end of all things. But when Peter finally defeats Captain Hook, he doesn't kill him yet, but once he defeats Captain Hook, he disengages and he starts to walk away. And he could just walk away with his family, with his Lost Boys intact, but Captain Hook is raging, and he says, "Peter, as long as you live, if you don't come back and fight me, I will haunt you, and I will come back for your children's children's children's." And that gives Peter pause. And he sets Maggie down, and he turns back, and he engages again with Captain Hook, until Captain Hook is finally defeated again, brought to his knees, and Peter takes his wig off with his sword, and so Captain Hook, played by Dustin Hoffman beautifully, is exposed as this pitiful old man who has just been grasping at straws, grasping at something to make him feel validated once again. But Peter, in 3 days' time, has proven to be, again, more than a match for Captain Hook. And then there's this falling action where Hook is finally defeated by the crocodile that he had, put into a clock in this sort of pirate land and sort of thing, whatever. You can make whatever you want out of that. But Peter is about to leave after Captain Hook has been vanquished, but he sends his children off, and he comes back, and he appoints one as a leader. Thud, the biggest of the Lost Boys. And he says, "Take care of everyone that's smaller than you." And then the smallest one says, "Who am I supposed to take care of?" And Peter says, "You take care of never bugs, the little ones." You see, what Peter's doing is he's giving the farewell, and he's saying, "You care for each other and care for this place that I have won back for you." And then after that, you don't see Peter ascend up, but you see the Lost Boy's gaze sort of go up, and you hear the noise as though Peter has been flying away and ascending up. And then all of a sudden, you see Jack and Maggie, and they come back in through the window that Peter used all those years ago, and they don't wake their mother. They go and they get into their bed, and Peter gets back, and he wakes up next to the Peter Pan statue that is in London, and he finds his way in, and he's even contacted by the old world that he used to belong to, that he used to be enslaved to, and he's no longer enslaved to it. He gets a cell phone call. Hey, this deal is about to go bad, and he sounds crazy. He sounds like he's from a different world. He sounds like he's gone mad, and he has to climb up this post in order to get to his family, in order to come back in through that window that he did so long ago. He gets back to his family, and all is well. His daughter loves him. His son loves him. He is whole again. He's saved his family. He has saved Neverland. All things have been restored. So, that's Hook. That is my take on it, and I have another take on it that I've asked somebody else, his name is Robert, to tell me a little bit about what he thought about it, and this is what he said. He said, I almost think of Wendy being the Christ, and Peter is actually being Peter in the Bible. He is in denial, and ultimately, all the events around the 3 days spur his recollection of everything that had been taught in the good old days, right? So 30 years ago. And his faith is renewed, culminating in the resurrection, right? His coming back, the defeat of Captain Hook. And this is what Robert says, I feel maybe like his kids are the Jewish people, God's people, being tempted by Captain Hook or Satan to still go their own way because of traditions and feeling like God has abandoned them. The little girl, so Maggie, is like Anna and Simeon, always believing and just waiting for Christ to be there. And Jack is like the Pharisees, the disbelieving remnant who thinks they know what they want for themselves, but Satan has really tricked them. He goes on to say, I almost think of the defeat of Hook in this movie as a defeat of the Jewish legalism in Peter's mind, and he is free to be who he was called to be. So I think that is a legitimate interpretation, and I would open this up to you. I'm going to open up the comment section, and I'd love to hear what you think about Hook as a Christ film. Now, I don't think it's a perfect Christ film. I think that there are far better Christ films, and we'll get into those. I think next week I really would like to do The Matrix and give a full treatment of that, because we should. But give a comment, give a like, and I hope that this has been a fun little rewatch for you. And when you have a video or a film that you would like me to watch, just put it in the comment section, and I'd be happy to entertain that as one that we do on one of these Wednesdays. So that's your devotion for today. Christ is the story that we all resonate with, and I hope that that his story blesses you as you find truths hidden in certain films. So that's that. Bye-bye.